Alright, so today I'm going to take a look at three Chromebooks side by side. The Samsung, this is last year's Samsung, the HP Chromebook, the 11-inch, and the Acer. Let's boot them all up. We're going to look more at the features than the performance because you know, they all run really well, like a Chromebook should, right? So one thing you might notice right off the get-go is that the HP actually has a nice glossy screen, and actually the colors are a bit more vivid, and I'm not sure if this will come through on camera or not. The Acer, while the specs are a little bit nicer, it's got the Intel Celeron processor, it's got 4 gigs of RAM, and when running benchmarks it does seem to perform a little bit better, just like we saw with the Lenovo when I ran the Lenovo against the Samsung. But there are a couple of things that are making me a little hesitant about doing a mass deployment of them. So let's take a look at each one sort of individually, and then we'll be able to compare the features that way. Alright, so we'll take a look at the Samsung Chromebook. This is last year's model. This one was actually made in March of 2013, and we've deployed just about 200 of these to high school students, and they've held up relatively well. We've had a moderate amount of screen breakage. So I think that that's in part because students aren't necessarily taking care of them, but also because these are somewhat flimsy, the lids. So a good amount of pressure on this lid actually causes the screen to crack. So in terms of features, it's got an SD card slot, obviously a headphone jack, HDMI, which has come in quite handy, USB, USB 3, and it's also got a spot for a mobile card. This one actually could have been on the cellular plan. So this has got the Samsung Exynos 1.7 gigahertz. It's got 2 gigs of RAM, and it's performed as expected for what we've been asking of them. So in terms of this Chromebook, it's done really well. Durability wise, I think the students need to be trained a little bit better in how to take care of equipment. So moving on to the HP. This particular one also has 2 gigs of RAM. It's got the Samsung Exynos processor, and you can see that it's got a more sleek design, I guess you'd say, or polished. It's got the glossy screen. It's got the pearl white finish with a nice blue trim ring. In terms of how these will hold up in the hands of students after deploying a couple of hundred MacBooks, I can tell you that these will be grungy, dirty. They will no longer be pearl white. Some disadvantages of this machine, it does have video out over the slim port. It's not a standard HDMI, so that requires an adapter. You've got USB here, and I believe that's your headphone jack. This is also your charging port, and that's pretty much it. There's no SD card slot. It's really nice looking, and it seems to be relatively durable in terms of the plastic itself. And here's the underside, and you would almost think that these would be sort of like a non-slip material, but they don't really seem like it. So these are on demo, courtesy of CDW. And I just thought I'd do a quick little demo of them. In terms of how it runs, it's comparable to the Samsung. We ran benchmarks on them, and it runs just about the same. Aside from the fact that the screen appears to have a deeper, more rich color. And so that's a noticeable difference, but in terms of the benchmarks themselves, it performed similarly. So, looking at the Acer. Now this one, on paper, actually looks like the better deal. It's a little bit less money. It's got 4 gigs of RAM. It's got the Intel Celeron processor. I'm not a big fan of Acer. We've reviewed a couple of their other machines when we were deploying netbooks, and we ended up not choosing them. Nothing against the product. It may hold up just fine, and again, the specs are, this one's being rated at 8.5 hours of battery life. The HP, according to the HP website, is only being rated at about 6.5 hours. So that does make you wonder you know, if the HP, and that says up to 6.5 hours, if it would actually make it through a school day in the hands of kids. One of the major concerns that we have about this, well, let's go first the features that we like. USB 3, headphone jack, HDMI. HDMI is important because the kids are plugging these into projectors and doing presentations. I think that's it. SD, oh, we've got SD right here on the side, and another USB. One thing I'm not entirely sure why they did, or why they put this here rather, is they put these vent holes in. And you've got some vents here for speakers, obviously, but this is a bad idea. In looking at the way that kids use these computers, they're not always using them on a desk. They take them home, they use them on their bed, they use them on their kitchen table, they eat around them. My fear is that things, crumbs and such, will get into these vent holes, as well as the chance that these could actually end up breaking. So that's a major concern for us if we were going to deploy these. The screen obviously isn't quite as, there looks to be like the refresh rate isn't quite as nice. You can actually see it on camera and comparing the other two. And the color is not quite as rich, and it is a matte screen as well, so it does look a little bit more flat. But in terms of performance, it's got the specs. It runs fine. It beats the other two in the benchmarks, just like the Lenovo did. So I'll be eager to see what the Dell Chromebook is like. You can pick it up with the management console and 4 gigs of RAM. I just got a quote today for just around 300, or just at 300, 302 I think. So, you know, and it was only a $12 difference between the 4 gig and the 2 gig. So with the management console at $300, that's pretty much doable. So we'll take a look at that when we get one in. We'll be getting a demo in here shortly. And at that time, I will have sent these demos back. But what I'll do is I'll just link to that Dell demo here. So thanks for watching. I know this isn't a real in-depth spec-based look at these Chromebooks, but it's more of a close-up look at the three side by side in kind of perspective from a mass deployment standpoint. So thanks for watching. Leave questions and comments below.